Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and I want to talk to you about what comes next after the middle class collapses. I think that's what we're experiencing right now in America, and it is something that you should prepare for because historically, when the middle class collapses, every society enters an era of crisis or chaos, and of course, sometimes both. Generally, the middle class are the stabilizers of the social contract between the extreme ends of the wealth classes as well as the state authority. And when there is no middle class left, extremism runs rampant. And that's why we're going to talk about it today, because it is something you should be preparing for, especially based on current economic indicators and the fact that we can just see things are degrading slowly. And of course, if you find this information useful or beneficial, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below because it does help the channel grow, and it's free, so is the like button and all the other things. Now, the middle class pays a large share of taxes while also consuming the most products, which means we're invested in the system. And yes, I consider myself to be middle class, although admittedly at the lower end, but I'm definitely not living in poverty, and I'm also not wealthy. But because of that status, there's a level of investment in the system to continually grow and prosper in order to better myself and my family and the community surrounding us. However, when we start to see disparity and when things start not to add up, when we see that the state-dependent class and the elite rich are the only ones that can afford to live, things only end in one of four ways. And unfortunately, it does feel like that's the case in many ways at this point in time, where you either do get the assistance you need, which is what gets you and your family through, which is generally a good thing when people actually require it, or you don't need any assistance at all because you're at the top echelon, which means you don't necessarily have to worry about whether or not you can afford something. Those people don't have to wonder how they're going to afford, groceries next week or what their bills are going to look like or anything along those lines. And everyone else in the middle is still trying to figure out what to do without any of those flexibilities. And that creates this entire situation we're going to go over right now. So what are those four things that always happen when societies reach this point? Okay. Well, the first one is economic restructuring. Now, economic restructuring can look like a lot of different things. And of course, there's a lot of talks about a digital dollar and, the central banks trying to issue digital currencies and everything else related to that, not to mention some level of social credit score and everything else we've talked about regarding like a technocracy. However, we also can look back historically and look at things like the New Deal back in the 1930s, where the economy was in a terrible situation and the government consolidated a lot of economic power to then help spur things on and move things forward, not necessarily in the same realm of good ideas that everybody shared, but just what the government decided to do. And that economic restructuring was one of the things you should anticipate to happen now, because it was what was used back then in the same form and function when the middle class began to collapse. Now, the next thing that always occurs is, well, one of the four things that will occur. We're not sure which one per se, and maybe more than one will happen, but the next thing is a political revolution of sorts. Now, that can look like a couple of different things. And of course, you could look back to like the US Civil War, and yes, that was an actual conflict, but it also was a political revolution where people felt that levels of representation were no longer inside of the government in order for them to be, properly taken care of as a constituent. So they felt that there needed to be a change. And this could be applied to anything else related to a political revolution when it comes to even just extreme ideologies beginning to seize power, or maybe even some of the things we see here currently in the United States, where we have democratic socialists starting to gain power and momentum and win elections because people in the middle class are no longer seeing how these other forms of government work properly, right? So there's a lot of ways that this can go, but a political revolution is definitely one of the four. Now, the third one, which is the one that we're really kind of preparing for, especially in this community, when it comes to having the supplies and the resources and the skills and the community that you need to get through something this catastrophic, is going to be a major conflict reset, where a large-scale war or conflict breaks out, which then allows for a major economic reset thereafter, which is what we saw during World War II. And we all know that this is always on the menu as a potential outcome for these economic turmoil scenarios, because it is effective and it does work, and it obviously redistributes wealth and economic power in many different ways. And it is something that you should be expecting to be leveraged as a tool to solve this, in many ways, unsolvable problem that we're facing right now. And so middle class collapses, suddenly there's a gigantic war that needs to be fought. Happens every single time, basically. So do with that what you will, but it is one of the reasons why we prepare in the manner that we do here in this community, because that is one of the most dangerous and yet most likely outcomes of this particular scenario. And then the fourth thing, in the sense of how a middle class collapse generally ends, is a sudden resource boom, which I would say is like the most positive potential outcome. However, it generally doesn't last very long, and it is something that works more like a Band-Aid than an actual cure. So a sudden resource boom would look like something along the lines of the 1990s dot-com bubble, right? So suddenly there's this new innovative technology or this new resource outlet that turns on the light switch, and now all of a sudden there's tons of jobs and opportunities and money to be made, and things happen very quickly, and the economy turns around for the short term, which is probably the best case scenario for us right now for something like that to occur. However, like in the 1990s, it often is a bubble, which means it eventually bursts, and then we're just right back to page one, which right now probably wouldn't be the worst thing for those of us who are struggling in the middle class in the sense of like this potential collapse scenario, because it does give you an opportunity to correct course, take care of some of your, negative assets, and at the same time, plan for things to get bad once again, right? So it creates an opportunity for planning and strategy that doesn't currently exist, right? So those are the four things that always happen. Anytime the middle class collapses in a society, one of those four things occurs. And sometimes two of them, three of them, sometimes all four, right? And it is something that you should be preparing for, because it does seem in many ways, and it does feel in many ways, that this is what we're witnessing here in the United States. And it's been going on for a long time, don't get me wrong. We've all, known that and felt that. But right now it feels somewhat accelerated based on the fact that so many things are working against us economically, while we also see that disparity between the different wealth classes, right? And we understand that it is true. Like if you're a state-dependent person when it comes to your particular wealth class, you do have that assistance that other people don't receive that might actually put you in a better position in some situations than the people who are in the middle. And then the people who are in the middle definitely don't have access to what the elite and the rich and the wealthy have. So it creates that environment of tension and that environment of potential, crisis and chaos, which is clearly where we've been for quite some time. So I just wanted to have this conversation, give you some ideas about what is likely to come in the future, give you some things to consider. And, hopefully, like I said, the best case scenario might be that sudden resource boom, usually unexpected and not necessarily something that's easily predictable. So perhaps that's our way out of this, and that might be, a blessing. But if any of the other three occur, it generally ends up in some form or fashion becoming a net negative at some point, right? So I guess we'll just see what happens. Anything else you need from me, go to magicprepper.com. If you want to support the channel, there are many ways to do so at that website, including discount codes and all types of other affiliate links, which might actually help you while also helping me. So, hey, a little bit of a mutual relationship there. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.